Hey guys, so you might have had this problem where you want to instance some objects along a spline and you want to control their size maybe with the radius or some random values, and the spacing between the objects start not making sense. The larger ones start overlapping and the smaller ones are very distant from each other. You want even spacing between the objects regardless of their radius or their size. And obviously, controlling the resample length by the radius doesn't work. So after some research, I found a solution by Nikita Akimov, if I'm not saying their name wrong, which I will link that in the description in case you want to check it out. And the solution is actually very simple. Now, I've gone ahead and created this GN adaptive curve resample node group, and you can download this for free on my Blender Superhive. And it's probably better to just download this and use it, because I am by no means a geometry nodes expert and I don't know much about math, and I'm not a very good teacher, but I will do my best to explain this for you in case you want to watch this. Now, we're not going to talk about this because it's simply just instancing the spheres. And this GN node adaptive curve resample is pretty self-explanatory. It's resampling by length count evaluated, who just uses the original input in case you have already resampled the curves. And it has an input value. Now this input value could be your radius, could be a random value, it could be curvature, tilt, or whatever that a curve can store or can read from a curve. Now, the random value acts pretty strange because if you change the maximum value, as you can see, it doesn't do anything. So instead, you only have to control the minimum value, and that will work. If you have 0.2 and 0.8 here, it starts working, but if you have 1 and 0, it's not going to work. So just change the minimum. Now, let's get inside of the node group. I'm also not going to explain this. It's a pretty simple menu switch for the sample types method. And basically what we want to do is that we obviously can't control the resampling. We can't say, hey, this area has a less radius, so add more points here. We can't do that because we don't have an area, we have points, we have the radius on the points. So what we want to do is that we want to resample it first and then set the position of the points to be closer to each other in the areas with less radius, or basically points with less radius, and we want the larger ones to be more distant from each other. Now, in the solution by Nikita Akimov, they use the curve length node to get the length of the spline. And as you can see, it works here in this example because these two are separated. But for the purpose of this tutorial, let's actually join these together. And as you can see, it just doesn't work the way we want it to. And also let's use the radius. And as you can see, it just doesn't work, because the curve length is the overall length of all the splines inside of this object. Instead, we want the length, which is a spline length, which is the total length of each spline in this object. And we also can't use all curves because we need to create some sort of mesh islands, in this case curve islands or IDs. How do we do that? We simply take the index and then we evaluate it on the splines, and this will give each spline a certain index. For instance, this one will be 0 and this one will be 1, sorry. And then we are taking our radius and dividing it by 2. The reason we are dividing this by 2 is that if we do not divide this by 2, it's going to intersect incorrectly. For instance, Not sure if it will be visible in this example. But as you can see that the distance from these points are much more from the distance from these points. What we want to do is that we want to shift these points to their intersection points. That's why we are dividing this by 2. And then after we have divided this by 2, we are going to add this to an accumulated field. What accumulate field does is actually very simple. Let me change this back to 1 and just checking something. Okay. What accumulate field does is that basically, let me see if I can draw anything. Say this is index 0, this is index 1, this is index 2. And say index 0 has a radius of, for instance, 1. Index 1 has a radius of 1.9 probably, and index 2 has a radius of 1.8. Now what accumulate field does is that it creates the total running of our radius. At index 0 it will be 1, and index 1 it will be 2.9. It basically adds it to the 1.9 we had already. And then here it will be, I think, 4. And the total gives the total values of all the indexes added together. Now we are adding this to the divide because this divide is like moving. And we are remapping this from the maximum of our accumulated field to the maximum length of our spline. The reason we are doing this, we don't really need to do this. We could just go from 0 to 1 and use factor instead of length. But the reason we are using the length, remapping from 0 to the total length of the spline, is because we are here using the length. So if it's, say, 3 centimeters, we also want this number to be 0 to 3 centimeters. And what's happening here is very simple. It's saying the gap between these two is based on the radius. So if the radius is very small, the gap will also be very small. And it goes from, say, 0.1 to 0.2 to 0.3 to 0.4, and it starts positioning these points from 0.1 to 0.2 to 0.3 to 0.4. And if we have 1, it will be 1 to 2 to 3. So that they are distanced correctly. So we are basically repositioning or adjusting the position instead of resampling. And again, you don't really need to do this. You can just do 0 to 1 and use the factor, and it works perfectly. But I think length just is more accurate. Let's actually see this. If this is 1, I don't think if they are that different. No, they aren't different at all. And we are also getting the same thing, the same divided point radius. And we are again setting it from 0 to the maximum total of the radius on the entire spline. And then we are rearranging it to the length. Why are we doing this? It's because the length of each of our splines, say we have multiple splines here, is going to be different. The length of each one is different. And we need a value that is specific to these splines. In this case, total length of the spline is that a specific value that we are going to need. And rearranging this to the 0 to maximum makes sure that we are always going to have the right numbers across all the splines. So you can see that what happens if we don't rearrange. And I'm also adding this multiply node because sometimes the values are so small, or the splines are so small, that you are actually going to have to multiply them with a certain number to make it work. And that's it really. It's very simple. And I'm not sure if I was able to give you any information than you already had, but you could just download this instead of watching this. So yeah, that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and hope to see you on the next one. By the way, guys, I'm pretty new to this, making videos and tutorials and breakdowns. So if you have any suggestions or feedback for improving my videos, please let me know. And yeah, thank you for watching.